2 discoveries that prove the Bible. Number 1. Pilate Stone. Archaeological discovery proved the truth of the Bible. The Pontius Pilate Stone. In June 1961, an Italian archaeologist named Dr. Antonio Frova led a campaign during which Maria Teresa discovered a limestone block. This block alone seemed to corroborate the truth of the Bible. So what is this Pilate Stone? The Pilate Stone is a damaged block of limestone measuring 82 centimeters by 65 centimeters. It bears a partially preserved inscription that is believed to have been written by Pontius Pilate, the prefect of the Roman province of Judea, from AD 26 to 36. This artifact was discovered at the Caesarea Maritima archaeological site in 1961, and it has been of significant importance ever since. The reason for its significance is that it bears an authentic 1st century Roman inscription that mentions the name Pontius Pilatus. Artifacts can provide a bigger picture of a particular culture and also offer detailed insights into the lives of individuals. Recently, a stone fragment was found near an ancient theater constructed by Herod the Great around 22 to 10 BC in the city of Caesarea. The fragment turned out to be a piece of the dedicatory inscription of a later building, possibly a temple. This inscription dates back to the time of Pilate, and it aligns with the historical accounts of his career. In fact, this inscription is the earliest surviving and only contemporary record of Pilate, who is mostly known from the New Testament. Its discovery is a significant contribution to our understanding of Pilate's life and times. It is likely that Pontius Pilate was based in Caesarea Maritima, where the stone was discovered, as the city had replaced Jerusalem as the administrative capital and military headquarters of the province in AD 6. 3 of the original 4 lines of text are still readable. The translation from Latin to English for the inscription reads, "To the divine Auguste, this Tiberium, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, has dedicated this." Interestingly, the Pilate Stone, as it has come to be known, provides confirmation that Pontius Pilate held the position of prefect in Judea. Philo, the Jewish philosopher, has given us the earliest surviving written account of Pontius Pilate. According to Philo, Pilate was a man with an inflexible and merciless disposition. He served as one of the emperor's lieutenants and had a tendency to become exceedingly angry. Pilate was ferocious, had a habit of insulting people, and unjustly executing them without trial or condemnation. The Roman historian Tacitus records that Christus suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus. Despite the doubts of skeptics, the Bible is a historically accurate document. Its descriptions of names, places, dates, empires, and events have been proven true time and again. In the past, archaeology was thought to disprove the Bible, but now many archaeologists agree that it is an accurate historical record. Christianity centers around the actions of Jesus on the cross. If there was no actual Jesus, cross, empty tomb, or Pontius Pilate in history, then the fundamental truth of Christianity would be called into question. But it isn't a lie. Pilate is a complex and fascinating character in the New Testament. But who is this Pontius Pilate? Jesus meets Pontius Pilate. Jesus had been arrested and was led away from Caiaphas and to the governor's headquarters. The Jewish officials refused to enter the Gentile arena because it would make them unclean and prevent them from eating the Passover. They had rejected God's Messiah and were attempting to execute an innocent man, but they were concerned about being ceremonially unclean. They couldn't see that their evil deeds had already made them filthy. When Pilate insisted that they judge Jesus according to their own law, they made their intentions clear. It is not legal for us to put anyone to death. According to secular history, Pilate is depicted as a harsh and merciless individual who lacked empathy towards the morals of others. Pilate's marriage to Caesar Augustus's granddaughter played a significant role in his appointment as the procurator of Judea, which he wouldn't have achieved otherwise. John chapter 18, verse 31. So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." Clearly, Jesus was not a victim of fate. He is the sovereign Lord who planned his death. Apparently, the Jews had informed Pilate that Jesus was claiming to be the Messiah and a king in opposition to Caesar, because when Jesus stood before him, he asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Following his Roman character, Pilate went straight to the point and demanded to know the accusation. He was a weak man who tried to cover up his weakness by a show of obstinacy and violence. His period of office was marked by several savage outbreaks of bloodshed. We read, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" Pilate, consistent with a Roman character, asked directly about the accusation. John noted their evasion of the question. "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." They didn't want Pilate to be the judge, but rather the implementer of the sentence which they had already passed illegally. We read, "You take him and judge him according to your law." When Pilate realized that the people were trying to avoid giving a clear accusation against Jesus, he instructed them to handle the matter themselves. He made it clear that if they could not present any legitimate accusations against Jesus, he would not judge him. Instead, they would have to follow their own law and not involve the Romans. Although John does not record it, the religious leaders eventually provided Pilate with a more specific accusation in response to his demand. Luke chapter 23, verse 2. "And they began to bring charges against him, saying, 'We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king.' The religious leaders did not want to judge Jesus according to their own law. They wanted him dead. But the Romans did not allow them to execute anyone under their own law. In the past, there were instances where religious leaders took the risk of executing those they believed were guilty without seeking permission from the Roman authorities. One such execution by stoning is recorded in Acts chapter 7, verses 54 through 60. In such cases, these leaders would generally choose stoning as the method of execution. It is believed that the religious leaders may have pressed for the crucifixion of Jesus to fulfill the curse mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 22 through 23. Now, if a person has committed a sin carrying a sentence of death and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body is not to be left overnight on the tree, but you shall certainly bury him on the same day. For he who is hanged is cursed of God, so that you do not defile your land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. He did bear that curse to redeem us from the curse of the law. Galatians chapter 3, verse 13. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, "Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree." The demand of the Jews that Jesus should be put to death by the Roman method of crucifixion was in fulfillment of Jesus' own words, "If I be lifted up." John chapter 3, verse 14. If the Jews had executed Jesus by stoning, the prophecy regarding the manner of his death would not have been fulfilled. John chapter 18, verses 33 through 35. Therefore Pilate entered the praetorium again, and summoned Jesus and said to him, "You are the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" Pilate intended to transfer this problem to Herod, since Jesus was from Galilee, which was under Herod's rule. However, Herod returned Jesus to Pilate, which is likely the start of the second appearance. We read, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Pilate had sent a detachment of Roman troops to arrest Jesus. John chapter 18, verse 3. So Judas, having obtained the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. This was Pilate's first encounter with a man the religious leaders claimed was dangerous. However, Pilate's inquiry betrayed uncertainty. Pilate had witnessed several unruly revolutionaries who professed to be kings. Pilate had expected to meet a sullen or belligerent rebel, but was instead met with the calm majesty of confident superiority. He could not reconcile the character of the prisoner with the charge brought against him. We read, "Are you speaking for yourself?" Jesus was curious to know whether Pilate was genuinely seeking the truth, or if he was merely asking on behalf of those who had already condemned Jesus. Depending on the source of Pilate's question, the answer could differ. If Pilate asked the question himself, he was likely wondering if Jesus was a political king who plotted against Caesar. If, on the other hand, he was prompted by Caiaphas, he was probably asking if Jesus was the Messianic king of Israel. In the first case, the answer would have been no, whereas in the second case, the answer would have been yes. We read, "What have you done?" Pilate, being a Roman, had no interest in Jewish spiritual or social ideas. However, he understood that if the religious leaders demanded the death of Jesus, he must have committed some wrongdoing. Pilate wanted to investigate the matter and find out what it was. Jesus could have provided an amazing response to the inquiry, "What have you done?" He was sinless and never did anything wrong against God or man. He performed miraculous healings, gave sight to the blind, calmed storms, walked on water, fed multitudes, defeated demons, and even raised the dead. His teachings were so clear and powerful that they astonished his listeners. He fearlessly confronted corruption and poured his life into a few men who were destined by God to change the world. He did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. It would have been wiser for Pilate to base his judgment on the prisoner's actions instead of asking what he had done. Jesus explains his kingdom to Pilate. John chapter 18, verse 36. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting, so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." We read, "My kingdom is not of this world." Jesus explicitly told Pilate that he was a king and had the authority to speak about his kingdom. However, he also made it clear that his kingdom was not a political kingdom and did not pose any threat to the existing political order. In contrast to the earthly kingdoms, the kingdom of Jesus has its origins in heaven and is not limited by human limitations. Jesus himself affirmed that his kingdom is not of this world. Furthermore, unlike the kingdoms of this world, the kingdom of Jesus is founded on the principle of peace. Jesus explained that if his kingdom were of this world, his followers would have fought to defend it. But this was not the case, as the kingdom of Jesus is not based on violence or coercion. There is no denying that his kingdom rules over this world. However, it will not be established by the power of this world. We read, "My kingdom is not from here." It is possible to imagine that Pilate was relieved and satisfied to learn that the kingdom of Jesus was not from this world. Pilate may have concluded that Rome had nothing to fear from Jesus and his kingdom. Romans believed that they were knowledgeable about kingdoms and their power. They thought that armies, navies, swords, and battles measured the strength of kingdoms. However, Jesus knew that his kingdom, although not of this world, was more powerful than Rome and would continue to grow and influence even after Rome had faded away. The kingdom of heaven is founded on love, sacrifice, humility, and righteousness, as demonstrated by Jesus on the cross. Jesus and Pilate discuss truth. John chapter 18, verses 37 through 38. Therefore Pilate said to him, "So, you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this purpose I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And after saying this, he came out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no grounds at all for charges in his case." We read, "Are you a king then?" Pilate was particularly interested in a specific statement. He didn't have any problem with religious leaders among the Jews, even if they were considered insane, as long as they didn't cause any trouble and didn't pose a threat to the Roman rule. However, if someone claimed to be a rival king, this could potentially lead to a challenge, and Pilate wanted to investigate this matter. We read, "You say rightly that I am a king." Jesus did not deny that he was a king. He insisted that he was born a king, but of a different kind. He came to be a king of truth, so that he could bear witness to the truth. He appealed to Pilate not for acquittal or mercy, but for recognition of the truth. He believed that it was only through truth that he could influence the minds and govern the manners of his subjects. "For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world." Many years later, Paul encouraged Timothy with these words. Christ Jesus, who witnessed the good confession before Pontius Pilate. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 13. Jesus' confession was that he was a king, and his kingdom came from heaven. It was a kingdom of eternal truth, in contrast to earthly power. We read, "For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world." The Lord suggests that he was born as a king with a specific purpose, which is a compelling evidence of the incarnation of the Son of God. We read, "I find no fault in him at all." Pilate had a conversation with the religious leaders who wished to put Jesus to death, and he made it clear that Jesus was not guilty. Pilate went beyond stating that Jesus was not guilty of a crime that deserved the death penalty. He found no fault in him at all. Pilate was aware of Jesus' innocence. John chapter 18, verses 39 through 40. However, you have a custom that I release one prisoner for you at the Passover. Therefore, do you wish that I release for you the King of the Jews? So they shouted again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a rebel. Judging that there was something different and innocent about Jesus, Pilate hoped that this custom of releasing a prisoner might help deliver this man whom Pilate knew was innocent. We read, Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Pilate asked the question to appeal to the crowd, hoping they would spare the man they had named as their own king from being crucified. Pilate hopes to satisfy the mob by having Jesus whipped and mocked. John chapter 19, verses 1 through 4. So Pilate then took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and placed it on his head, and put a purple cloak on him. And they repeatedly came up to him and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And slapped him in the face again and again. And then Pilate came out again and said to them, See, I am bringing him out to you so that you will know that I find no grounds at all for charges in his case. In the past, Pilate stated that he found no fault in Jesus. However, he still ordered a severe and brutal punishment for a man whom he knew was innocent. Some people suggest that Pilate wanted to help Jesus by hoping that the mob would be satisfied with the scourging. Since Pilate gave the order, Jesus was scourged according to the Roman practice. The whip used for scourging had many leather strands, each with sharp pieces of bone or metal at its end. It caused the back to become raw flesh, and it was not uncommon for a criminal to die from this punishment, even before the crucifixion. Scourging was a punishment method with three purposes. It was used to punish prisoners, to obtain confessions of crimes from prisoners, and to weaken the victim in cases of crucifixion, so that they would die more quickly on the cross. Pilate ordered the scourging of his prisoner in the hope that it would satisfy the crowd, not as part of the capital punishment or to elicit the truth. However, his decision was ill-judged. It is remarkable that the Gospels only use one word to describe this horrific event, without attempting to manipulate our emotions. The Gospel of Matthew states that Jesus was stripped of his clothes and given a reed to mock a royal scepter. The soldiers bowed before him, offering false homage and honor, while also spitting on him. However, we have the option to do the opposite of what these soldiers did to Jesus. Instead of mocking and dishonoring him, we can honor and praise him. Let us be creative in devising ways to honor our King and offer him true homage, unlike the soldiers who only pretended to do so. We read, That you may know that I find no fault in him. Pilate, as a judge, had both responsibility and reason to set Jesus free, declaring him innocent of any wrongdoing. He made 5 attempts to release Jesus, as we can learn from Luke chapter 23, verses 4, 15, 20, 22, and John chapter 19, verses 4, 12, and 13. However, instead of setting him free, Jesus had to endure humiliation and brutality. Pilate presents Jesus to the crowd. John chapter 19, verses 5 through 6. Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "Behold, the man!" So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they shouted, saying, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no grounds for charges in his case." Pilate invited the crowd to carefully consider the suffering of this one that was presented before them. In a way, Pilate was speaking on behalf of God, who invites all of humanity to behold the man, the perfect man, the tested and approved ideal of all humanity. This is an invitation to see the man of men in all his glory. Pilate believed that he could rescue Jesus by debasing him. Similarly, some individuals in modern times also tried to do this by asserting that Jesus is not divine, or that he was incorrect about certain things, in an effort to keep Jesus relevant in a progressive scientific era. However, such attempts are just as misguided as Pilate's actions. It is unclear how the crowd reacted to the situation, but it is possible that they may have felt a moment of sympathy for the strong and remarkable man involved. However, the religious leaders present immediately reacted with pure hatred towards him, screaming, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" The crowd might have felt sorry for the prisoner, but the priests and their followers silenced any sympathy by shouting their hatred. John chapter 19, verses 7 through 11. The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all, if it had not been given to you from above. For this reason, the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." According to John's account, the religious leaders' real accusation against Jesus was not that he claimed to be king, but that he claimed to be God, the one and only Son of God. They understood this claim in a very particular way, believing that when Jesus called himself the Son of God, he was actually claiming to be equal to the Supreme Being. We read, "He was the more afraid." Pilate did not react with anger or amusement when he was told that Jesus had proclaimed himself as the Son of God. Instead, he was filled with more fear than ever before. Pilate saw something in Jesus, even in his beaten, bloodied, and spat upon state, that made him consider the possibility that Jesus was more than just an ordinary man. The phrase "more afraid" may actually have a superlative force, as is often seen in New Testament Greek, and could be translated as exceedingly afraid. Pilate was not a particularly religious man, but the news of Jesus' divine claims terrified him. During that time, all Romans were familiar with stories of gods or their offspring appearing in human form. We read, "Where are you from?" Pilate wanted Jesus to defend himself and provide more reasons to be released as an innocent man. He was searching for a good enough reason to let him go. Pilate hoped that Jesus would explain what distinguished him from the many other prisoners that Pilate had judged before. However, Jesus had already informed Pilate that he was the king of a kingdom that was not of this world, and had already disclosed where he was from. Therefore Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Although he already had the answer, one could argue that Pilate asked the right question. His question is almost the most pertinent question that can be asked about him. For to know where Jesus comes from is to know the most important thing about him. John chapter 19 verses 10 through 11. So Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and I have authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all if it had not been given to you from above. For this reason the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." Pilate was astonished that Jesus refused to speak in his own defense. He couldn't believe that Jesus didn't plead for mercy, as many others had done before him. Pilate was also surprised that Jesus didn't seem intimidated by the power and authority that Pilate held as a representative of Rome, who was judging him. The prophecy of Isaiah chapter 53 verse 7 was fulfilled when Jesus remained silent before his accusers and judges, like a sheep before its shearers. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 7. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth, like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. Do you not know that I have power? Pilate was surprised that Jesus wasn't intimidated by his power to condemn and crucify, as he believed he held the power position. Pilate believed that he had the power to make decisions, but in reality, he only had the ability to cause harm and do wrong. He lacked the power to do what was right. Although it was evident that Jesus was innocent, Pilate bowed down to the pressure of the religious leaders and the crowd that they had influenced. By claiming that he had the power to do what the crowd wanted, he actually had no power at all. The right thing to do would have been to release the innocent man, but Pilate's weakness caused him to make the wrong decision. The man who claimed to have all power attempted to absolve himself of the decision, stating, "I didn't really want to do this." Matthew chapter 27 verse 24. Now when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. You yourselves shall see." We read, "You could have no power at all against me unless it have been given you from above." Jesus explained the true nature of power to Pilate, who believed Rome possessed the power. However, Jesus knew that God held the true power. He acknowledged Pilate's power, but clarified that it was granted by God and not inherent in Pilate or Rome. When Jesus said, "The one who delivered me to you has the greater sin," he was not claiming that Pilate was without sin. Rather, he was saying that the religious leaders were guilty of a greater sin than Pilate's in delivering him to the Roman authorities. The phrase, "He that delivered me," can refer to either Judas or Caiaphas, as the language used by the evangelist is intentionally vague. John chapter 19 verses 12 through 13. As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him, but the Jews shouted, saying, "If you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. We read, Pilate sought to release him. We detected a sense of panic in the Roman governor. The panic intensified when his wife urged him to free the accused due to a dream she had. Matthew chapter 27 verses 19 through 20. And while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message saying, "See that you have nothing to do with that righteous man. For last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. It is difficult to know for sure what she saw in her dream. It could have been a vision of Jesus, an innocent man being crowned with thorns and crucified. Alternatively, she may have seen him descending from the clouds in glory. It is also possible that she saw him presiding over the great white throne of judgment, with her and her husband standing before him. He knew this innocent man, a man not like any other prisoner he had seen before, should be set free. Yet he felt the full force of the crowd and religious leaders demanding his crucifixion. If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. From a human perspective, it was the mention of Caesar that ultimately led to Jesus' faith. The phrase "a friend of Caesar" had a more significant meaning than just a reference to Roman patriotism. It was commonly used to refer to someone who was a supporter or associate of the emperor and held an important position within the inner circle. Although he desired to be a friend of Caesar, he was not really his friend and barely knew him. Pilate presented Jesus before the crowd and judgment seat. However, in truth, it was Pilate who was being judged, not Jesus. Matthew chapter 27 verses 14 through 16. And still he did not answer him in regard to even a single charge, so the governor was greatly amazed. However, Pilate did not pass the test. Driven by his fear of the crowd, he made the decision to send an innocent man to a painful death. This is why the ancient creed states that Jesus was crucified during the reign of Pontius Pilate. The crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. Matthew chapter 27 verses 17 through 18. As per the Roman tradition, Jesus carried his own cross from the place of his sentencing to the place of the skull, where he was to be crucified. In those times, the Romans would put the cross on the condemned man and force him to carry it in a public procession to draw attention to his crime and faith. Crucifixion was first invented by the Persians, but the Romans perfected it and made it a common practice. It was a punishment reserved for the worst criminals and the lowest classes. The purpose of crucifixion was to inflict slow, painful, and humiliating death upon the victim in public. This was the exact form of death that God intended for Jesus to die, and Jesus submitted to it in accordance with God's will. Archaeologists found in 1968 the remains of a man crucified in Jesus' era. The study of the remains indicated that the victim was nailed to the cross in a sitting position. Both legs were sideways, with the nail penetrating the sides of both feet just below the heel. The arms were stretched out, with a nail in each forearm. Dr. Nico Haas, a professor of anatomy at Hebrew University, described it as a compulsive position, a difficult and unnatural posture designed to increase the sufferer's agony. And two others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. There were 3 planned for crucifixion on that particular day: the 2 others and Barabbas. Jesus bore the place of Barabbas. According to Roman custom, the individual who was to be crucified had their crime written out, and a title hung around their neck as they carried their cross to the place of death. The title was later placed at the top of the cross, so that everyone would know the reason for the crucifixion. In his death, Jesus remained connected to his humble roots in Nazareth. He was acknowledged as a king, even in death. Earthly kings often claim their throne by causing the deaths of others. But Jesus, through his own death, was declared king to the entire world. Pilate wanted this statement regarding Jesus to be as public as possible. This is also an unknowing prophecy of how the message of Jesus Christ and him crucified and reigning as king would be published to every nation and language, that it was from the beginning intended as a global message. The religious leaders objected to Pilate's title as they believed it was false. They did not believe that Jesus was the King of the Jews. Moreover, the leaders thought that the title was demeaning because it showcased Rome's power to humiliate and torture even the King of the Jews. What I have written, I have written. Pilate finally found the courage to defy the Jewish rulers, but it was for a matter that wasn't very significant. Pilate acknowledged the true nature of the King of Truth, both in his humility and in his glory. "I won't change what I have written," Pilate said. According to Roman law, once a sentence is pronounced, it cannot be altered. And since this inscription was considered to be the sentence against our Lord, it cannot be changed. Joseph of Arimathea sets Jesus in his own tomb. Matthew chapter 27 verses 57 through 61. Now when it was evening, a rich man from Arimathea came, named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut out in the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary, sitting opposite the tomb. Customarily, the bodies of crucified criminals were left on their crosses to rot or to be eaten by wild animals. But the Jews wanted no such horror displayed during the Passover season, and Romans were known to grant the corpses of executed men to friends or relatives for proper burial. Matthew chapter 27 verses 62 through 66. Now on the next day, that is, the day which is after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate, and they said, "Sir, we remember that when that deceiver was still alive, he said, 'After 3 days I am rising.' Therefore give orders for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal him and say to the people, 'He has risen from the dead,' and the last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go, make it as secure as you know how." And they went and made the tomb secure with a guard, sealing the stone. They gave Pilate a title of honor and respect. But the day before, these same religious leaders rejected the King of Kings. They mocked and despised him, putting Jesus to open shame, but they honored Pilate. It must mean that the chief priests and Pharisees actually approached Pilate on the Sabbath with their request. If they did that, it is clear to see how radically they broke the Sabbath law. Ironically, the enemies of Jesus remembered his promise of resurrection better than his own disciples remembered. In this, the enemies of Jesus admit that Jesus is dead. They did not believe the swoon theory, a conjecture that denies the resurrection, saying that Jesus never really died, but just swooned on the cross, and then somehow wonderfully revived in the tomb. "You have a guard. was Pilate's promise to supply a Roman guard. According to archaeological evidence and ancient texts, Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, who was responsible for sentencing Jesus of Nazareth to be crucified, was a cruel leader. His main objective was to advance the interests of Rome in the Judean province. Pilate was also self-serving and understood the importance of maintaining the support of Emperor Tiberius. However, Pilate's cruelty and his habit of executing men without a proper trial led to his recall to Rome in 37 AD, where he was tried and punished. Eusebius, a historian, reports that Pilate eventually fell into misfortune and became his own executioner. Number 2. New Babylon. Archaeological discovery proved the truth of the Bible. Daniel chapter 4 verse 30 proved something that many did not believe for many years. Daniel chapter 4 verse 30. The king said thoughtfully, "Is not this the great Babylon which I myself have built as the royal residence and seat of government by the might of my power and for the honor and glory of my majesty?" According to Daniel chapter 4 verse 30, it was known that Nebuchadnezzar was the creator of the New Babylon, which was previously believed to be untrue. However, recent archaeological evidence has confirmed that Nebuchadnezzar did indeed build the New Babylon during the Maccabean period. Nobody had thought that Nebuchadnezzar was responsible for the creation of the New Babylon during that time. It was believed that Nebuchadnezzar never actually built the New Babylon city due to the lack of archaeological evidence supporting this claim. However, recent excavations have confirmed that he did indeed construct the city. This discovery has revealed that the previous assumptions were incorrect. Interestingly, the Bible was already aware of this fact, even before it was confirmed by these recent research findings. The New Babylon was a significant undertaking, and its construction involved the use of advanced engineering techniques. Nebuchadnezzar's creation of the city was a reflection of his ambition and desire to establish a powerful empire. Despite the skepticism surrounding the construction of the New Babylon, it is now clear that Nebuchadnezzar's vision and determination allowed him to create one of the most impressive empires of the ancient world. During a time when the lines between gods and mortals were blurred, Nebuchadnezzar reigned as both a ruler and deity. He commanded not only respect, but also worship from his subjects, creating an atmosphere of mystique and religious fervor. Nebuchadnezzar was an incredibly significant individual, so much so that no one else in the world could compare to him. Even the slightest hint of disrespect towards his servants or speaking out of turn directly to him was enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. King Nebuchadnezzar wielded unprecedented power and privilege that exceeded most people in history. He built a vast and mighty empire that eventually subjugated two other great civilizations, Assyria and Egypt. He held more control over the world during his reign than any other man before him. However, his written testimony reveals that his wealth and power gradually made him intoxicated by his success. He became increasingly arrogant, and his position as the most powerful man on earth gave him a distorted and inflated view of life and the world around him. The British Museum houses 6 ancient columns with inscriptions that date back to the Babylonian era. These columns offer a unique perspective into the life and reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, particularly his efforts to transform the city through ambitious building projects. The inscriptions on the columns provide valuable information about the king's vision to improve the city's infrastructure, architecture, and overall beauty. These columns are considered significant historical artifacts, and the majority of bricks found during Babylon's excavations bear the inscription, Nebuchadnezzar, King of Babylon, supporter of Esagila and Ezida, exalted firstborn son of Nabopolassar, King of Babylon. The Bible tells us a lot about this man, who was the greatest man of his time. This king fell by the hand of God and praised the God of Israel. Nebuchadnezzar had married a beautiful princess from the Persian mountains, where Tehran, Iran's capital, was now located. She arrived at Nebuchadnezzar's palace, but quickly became homesick. She missed the mountains, the trees, and the wild animals the most. When Nebuchadnezzar learned the reason for her dissatisfaction, he immediately committed to rectifying the situation. He constructed a massive brick mountain and adorned it with an array of trees, shrubs, and plants. Its breathtaking appearance earned it a place as one of the 7 wonders of the world. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon attracted many visitors. Above the gardens, a private zoo of exotic animals was built to entertain the king's wife, unfamiliar with the flat surroundings of Babylon. One day, he was standing on the roof of his magnificent palace when he suddenly realized what he had accomplished. "Isn't this the great Babylon that I have built by my own power and glory?" he asked himself. Feeling proud and accomplished, he dozed off and dreamed. Daniel chapter 4 is the only Old Testament story where a person is transformed into an animal, similar to the classical motif of metamorphosis. Think of the scene in Pinocchio when the boys transform into jackasses, or the numerous tales from the Roman poet Ovid, where the gods change humans into creatures that represent their tragic flaws. The text portrays Nebuchadnezzar's destiny in the following way. He was banished from human and animal mind, which changes his perspective and restores his relationship with God. Nebuchadnezzar's account invites us to repent of pride and ignoring God. But at a more profound level, it reveals the character of our God, who humbles us and restores us to our right mind. A king of such stature deserves our utmost admiration and praise. In contrast to Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance, Jesus ascends his throne through humility. He is the great and everlasting King, as Paul tells us. This move from very God to humble human parallels Nebuchadnezzar's descent from great king to lowly beast. But in contrast to the king of Babylon, King Jesus willingly descends the created order to become like those he cares for. Jesus Christ took on a human mind to redeem man. God does not command what he has not accomplished. The exaltation of Jesus over both heaven and earth was a result of his display of humility. Nebuchadnezzar's humility served as a prelude to his praising the King of Heaven. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of Heaven, for all his works are right, and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. This kind of praise is the proper human response to God's goodness and glory. But pride disorders our minds, so that we ignore God and become less than human. Paul urges us to reflect on Christ's humanity, so that we can embody his mind. When we see the character of God shining in his humility, it humbles us and leads us to praise. Like Nebuchadnezzar and like Jesus, we must humble ourselves to ascend to our full humanity. However, this is not the only item that has been found that changed everything. To watch another discovery that proved the truth of the Bible, click here.